Turn to Genesis chapter 48, verse 1. It came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel collected his strength and sat up in the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, Behold, I'll make you fruitful and numerous. I'll make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession." There's something we see about Jacob, that even though he came from the comparatively primitive part of the world called Canaan to this very modern country called Egypt, that he wasn't so taken up with everything that he saw in Egypt that he forgot about his calling, that God had called him to possess Canaan. Whether Canaan was a developed country or not was besides the point. The point is that God had called him and told him that he and his descendants would have to be in Canaan. There are very few believers who can resist the temptation, when they can live a comfortable life in some other place which is more advanced and comfortable, to leave it. And that can be a test, and we could say that in a sense Egypt was a test for Jacob to see whether he would give up his calling when he saw all the advancements of society in Egypt. And there we see towards the end of his life, as he was on his deathbed, he keeps his vision on Canaan, the place where God had spoken to him that he and his descendants were to live. His heart was set on that. And that is the type of person whom God can say he is the God of Jacob, because despite all his other failings, we can say that he desired to be in the place where God wanted him to be, and he would not succumb to the temptation of the comforts of a more advanced country. And though his son is such a big person in that country, his son is almost the top ruler in that country, and yet he says, "No, my home is back there where God's called me to be. I'm here temporarily, but my heart and mind is set on that which God's called me to." He says, "Now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are." Now what we see in these coming two chapters, chapter 48 and 49, is Jacob speaking prophetically. He is speaking concerning his sons, prophesying concerning what is going to happen to them in the days and the years to come in future generations. And we can contrast this with Isaac, who could never say anything concerning what would befall Jacob or Esau. He never could gather Jacob and Esau and prophesy to them. Isaac had had an easy way through life. He had received everything freely from his father and lived a fairly comfortable life. He lived a good life, of course, but a fairly comfortable, easy life. There was not much discipline. And so we find at the end of his life there is no prophecy either. But Jacob had gone through the mill, we can say. He'd been ground by God in the mill, and all his hopes were shattered, and he'd gone through frustrations, disappointments, discipline, difficulty, hardship. And through all that, he got a spiritual education. We can say that Jacob went through a real Bible school conducted by God. And the result was that he had learned through all that, so that when he says something, few words, in fact, the words that he speaks to each of his sons are very few, less than half a minute almost to most of his children. And yet they were so prophetic concerning exactly what was going to happen hundreds of years later for them. And we can say that this is the basis of prophecy, because that's our calling in the church, to be able to speak the word in such a way that we can help the people we speak to. And it's not long sermons. There is a place for teaching, but prophecy can be very brief. Jacob's words of prophecy to his sons were, as I said, less than a half a minute to each of them, and they were so appropriate. In fact, that's the word the Holy Spirit uses later on, appropriate to each one. Beginning with Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now Jacob had 12 sons, beginning with Reuben and all the way down to Benjamin. And we know that there were 12 tribes in Israel. Later on, long after Jacob died, and they came to the land of Canaan, there were 12 tribes. But the interesting thing we see is that God removed one of those tribes that descended from one of the sons of Jacob, the tribe of Levi, and made them priests. And said, you are to have no inheritance, and you're not even going to be counted with Israel. And all the Levites were not counted among the 12 tribes. So we were left with only 11. So which are the 12 tribes then? The 12 tribes are 10 sons of Jacob, their descendants, and instead of Joseph, the two sons of Joseph. That's how it becomes 12 later on in the Old Testament. Now, how in the world did Jacob know that? That is by prophetic vision. He said, Ephraim and Manasseh are going to be my sons, just like Reuben and Simeon. They are going to be part of my family. They are not my grandsons. They are my sons, just like Reuben and Simeon. And that's exactly what happened. For we find that Ephraim and Manasseh became the heads of 2 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Though Jacob didn't know why that would happen, he just spoke as he was given utterance at that time by God. But a man who has gone through discipline under God's hand may not always know what he's speaking, but what he speaks will be exactly according to the need of those who hear. So he says, your offspring, verse 6, that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. That means they're going to get an inheritance along with the other 10 sons of mine. That was really prophetic. And when he sees them, he remembers his beloved wife who died. As for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan, on the journey when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. What a relationship he had with his wife, that so many years after her death, he still remembers her with great affection. A good example for husbands. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, who are these? And Joseph said, these are my sons. He said, bring them to me that I may bless them. And then the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Physically he was dim, just like Isaac. Isaac's eyes were dim when he told Esau to go and get the venison. And Israel, that's Jacob, who's now called Israel, his eyes were dim too. But the difference was that Isaac's spiritual eyes were also dim, whereas Jacob's spiritual eyes were crystal clear. And that's quite a contrast. And that's how we must come to the end of our lives. When I see some old believers who've been believers for many years, they're advanced in age now, and they're so sour and so bitter and so demanding, so grumpy, and not full of the joy of the Lord, and imposing themselves on other younger people. I say, Lord, save me from ever degenerating into an old man like that. Think of that. It's easy to end up like that if we have not worked out our salvation in our younger days. Very easy. It's because Jacob went through discipline that he ended his life in such a glorious way. We can say, well, that's a long way before I become an old man, but that's what everybody says. But time flits by so fast. In any case, there's not probably time left for all of us to become old people, for the coming of the Lord is near. it's important that we grow in wisdom quickly so that we can have a prophetic word for those who come to us. And Israel said to Joseph, verse 11, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well. And Joseph took them from his knees and bowed his face to the ground. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand, because Ephraim was the younger. He took Ephraim towards Israel's left hand. And Manasseh he took with his left hand towards Israel's right hand, because Manasseh was the oldest, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand. He couldn't see which was which. But you see the leading of God, that he lays his right hand not in the normal way on these two, but he crosses his hands and puts the right hand on Ephraim's head. Because the right hand was supposed to be the greater blessing than the left. And crossed in his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph. And he said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who's been my shepherd all my life to this day. This has been his experience and this has been his testimony. That though he went through rough parts, it was God who shepherded him. And the angel who has redeemed me from all evil. Bless these lads, and may my name live on in them, the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it's interesting, that though Joseph was such a good man and a very upright person, and very wise when it came to worldly administration, yet he did not have that discernment yet concerning his own children, which his father had. His father had gone through God's mill and knew what he was doing. Joseph did not have that discernment. And in fact, it says it displeased him. And he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father. This one is the firstborn. You made a mistake. Place your right hand on his head. And his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. What beautiful words. I know. I'm not so dumb spiritually, though I can't see physically. I know what I'm doing. The Word of God says that the natural man cannot understand why a spiritual man does things in a certain way. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14 and onwards. And it is foolishness to him. The natural mind, however sharp it may be, cannot understand why a spiritual person does and behaves in a certain way. Jacob says, I know. Yes, Manasseh will also become a people. He'll also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater. Here is prophecy. His younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. This is no giving the blessing to the one who will bring the venison first. No. He's gone through the mill. He's not bothered about venison or curry or any such thing. He says, I know what I'm doing. I have no partiality here. And I'm not going to go by your suggestion. Joseph, you're a good brother, but I know what I'm doing. And your suggestion, though good, is not really the way God is leading. That which appears right to us naturally is very often not right spiritually. And he blessed them that day, saying, May by you Israel should pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, not like Manasseh and Ephraim. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. And it's very interesting when you read through the scriptures towards the latter part of the Old Testament, after the days of Solomon, the days of Rehoboam, the kingdom of Israel, 12 tribes, was split into two, and the northern kingdom comprised of 10 tribes, and very often in the prophets, the 10 tribes were called Ephraim. Ephraim was the combined name for 10 tribes. It was the name by which the northern kingdom of Israel was often called. How right Jacob was concerning the future. Manasseh, on the other hand, half the tribe of Manasseh, we read in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, never even wanted to cross into Jordan. They stayed on the other side of Jordan. They said, this beautiful land here, we'd like to stay here. And Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am about to die. But God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. There again, his heart is not set on this advanced country of Egypt. His heart is set on the primitive land of Canaan because that is where God has called him. The important thing, brothers and sisters, is not to go to a land where things are comfortable and easy, but to be in the place where God has called us. Perhaps 1% of believers are gripped by that. But Jacob was one of those gripped by that. He says, I'll give you one portion. Here's the double portion, the birthright that went to Joseph. Joseph got the birthright. I'll give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. I want you to turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And verse 21. We read, by faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped. And here is that beautiful phrase, leaning on the top of his staff. How did he bless the sons of Joseph correctly? Leaning on the top of his staff. And that staff reminded him that many years earlier at Peniel, God had dislocated his thigh and broken him. After 20 years of discipline, broken him. And he leaned upon God. That staff was a symbol of his leaning upon God from that day. Leaning upon God, he blessed the sons of Joseph by faith. Correctly. He did that by faith. By leaning upon God. That is what faith means. And so that is how true prophecy comes. True prophecy comes when a man has been so dislocated, his own strength. And all of us have a particular area where we have strength. With some people it is their intellect, some people it is their money, some people it is something else, but where God has been able to break them, and they are dislocated and broken, and they are learned to lean upon a staff, then they can prophesy by faith correctly. Otherwise it will be like Joseph, good brother, upright brother, but not broken like Jacob. And therefore not able to discern which of these two sons, what is going to befall these two sons in the future. It's very easy sometimes. We see even good brothers not able to discern another person. You can be a good brother, and yet you may not have discernment concerning a need in the church. Because there, God, you have to be broken. It's not enough to be a good brother like Joseph. You have to be a broken brother like Jacob. There is a difference. It's not enough to be a good upright brother like Joseph. You've also got to be a broken brother like Jacob, who leans upon the top of his staff. Then you have discernment. That's what we need, brothers and sisters. Discernment, spiritual discernment. Otherwise we shall go by our natural reason and say this is like this and this is like this, and we'll be completely wrong. We may even be upset that a more spiritual brother has a different view than us on this. And we wonder why. Maybe you're a good brother, but you're not broken. That may be the reason. Joseph couldn't understand why Jacob did it that way. In fact, he was displeased. Have you ever been displeased or a bit upset that another brother does it differently from the way you would do it, and it's disturbed you? Yeah, it's good to judge ourselves and see whether we have resisted brokenness and just been good. It's brokenness that brings discernment. And then Jacob assembled all his sons and said, I will tell you what shall befall you in the days to come. Think of the confidence this man has. He says, I'm going to tell you now, all of you. I have told Ephraim and Manasseh, now I shall tell you, the rest of you, what shall befall you in the days to come. Gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. Even Abraham never did this. Isaac never did it. But Jacob, the man who was a crook, who was a grabber, who was a deceiver, what an encouragement to us that God could so change this man and break him that he ends his days in prophecy. In fact, he prophesies and then it says he just got into bed and died. What a wonderful way to die. To prophesy with our last breath, and then it can be written of us, he just lifted up his legs onto his bed and died. Wonderful. That is the tremendous thing that God can do when we are broken. Isaac was not a grabber like Jacob. Isaac was not, humanly speaking, he was not so deceitful and a crook like Jacob. But yet God was able to do a greater work for Jacob because he broke him. We can be good brothers, but if we are not broken, we don't come into prophecy. We don't come into spiritual vision.